Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Udis, and this show is the 20th segment in the series on the network of global corporate control. Thank you for joining us. We've been viral this week on the internet, so I expect that there are some new viewers, and that's why today's program will look in depth at what's happening with the global currency reset. We're going to do some questions and answers, and we're also going to give people some indicators that we're on track, and we're going to talk about next steps. Just this afternoon, I got a phone call from someone who wanted to know personally, what does the global currency reset mean? Because she's a little bit nervous. She's been hearing things in the mainstream media, and she's wondering whether there's going to be a smooth transition. And I had to tell her that although I have every indication that we're going to have a pretty smooth transition, I can't give her any guarantees. She wanted to know whether she should start school or whether she should just batten down the hatches and get herself provisioned up just in case we don't have a smooth transition. And the first thing that I said to her was that my daughters don't listen to me when I give them advice, so I can't really guarantee that I've got the corner on what's really going to happen. But I did tell her that what I'm going by is a very powerful model that we have from the Department of Defense, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on in the program. I have every expectation that even though we have never had a global currency reset before, I think we're going to do okay, and that's because we have something called a coalition for the rule of law. And what is that coalition? That is just about everybody who's been trying to figure out what's going on, has been looking on the internet to see where we are, and some of them have found me and some of the other people that I'm working with. I've been working with just about anybody, and if you want to contact me, all you have to do is go to my website. There's a contact page, and I respond personally to every single email that I get. What is the global currency reset? It's exchanging paper currency and all the currencies of the world for currency that contains gold equal to the value of the bill. And we're also going to be introducing local currencies in the villages and towns. Some of the villages have already done that, especially in the United Kingdom. Why is it necessary to have a global currency reset? This is because all the paper currencies of the world are on the verge of crashing. We know this because gold went into backwardation in July 2013, and we're on the verge of something called permanent gold backwardation. What is backwardation? That's a term that the gold traders use for when you try to buy gold today and it costs more than buying gold in the future. And this happened in 1971, just before the United States went off the gold standard. It used to be that you could go into a bank and present a Federal Reserve note and get gold in exchange, and that was suspended in 1971. People want to know, what is the network of global corporate control? That's a hidden super entity that was exposed by three mathematicians in ETH Zurich. That's the best university in Europe. Vitali Glatfelder and Battiston did a study, and what they found was that there is one company that controls 40% of the assets, the earnings, the annual earnings, and wait a minute, it's 60% of the annual earnings and 40% of the net worth of all of the 40,000 companies that are traded on the capital markets. And at the very center of this super entity is the Bank for International Settlements. That is 60 central banks. They're private. And these bankers have been doing something called quantitative easing, which is a funny word that they invented. It really means Sabotaging. They're sabotaging the currencies so that the currencies will crash. And this same stunt was pulled in the 400s during Rome. And this super entity was actually around in that period of time. That super entity has been with us since the previous ice age. And we discussed in a previous segment how we know that. It had to do with a map that came to light in Turkey in the 1500s. And that map showed that the coastline of Antarctica, which is now buried under ice, that there was a very accurate cartographer who could draw the land mass perfectly. So this group is trying to crash our currencies and lead us into mass starvation and pestilence. But this time around, we have the internet, and we have all been comparing notes, and we have this study of the Federal Institute of Technology, and we saw what happened in Rome, and so we are simply not going to allow our currencies to crash. And if people want to know who decided on the global currency reset and who's in charge, we have inherited the World Bank and International Monetary Fund from Jose Rizal. The Board of Governors, that's 188 ministers of finance and development that run the World Bank and the IMF. These are the people that have decided that there is going to be a global currency reset. Who put the Board of Governors in charge? It was Jose Rizal. He was the nephew of Queen Victoria. And Jose Rizal went to the Vatican and he became the Superior General of the Jesuits between 1942 and 1946. And when he was the Superior General, he took the world's gold and he shipped it to Singapore, had it restamped, and put into a trust for the benefit of humanity. This trust is called the Global Debt Facility, and I'm the lawyer for the Global Debt Facility. You may want to know, how did I get this job? It's because I was in the World Bank legal department for 21 years. Ibrahim Shihada brought me into the World Bank. He hired me in 1986, and one of the reasons he hired me is because I studied a group that came into being in, it's called the Group of 77, but it was in 1975 that I studied that group when they were forming a coalition. It's 133 developing countries. If anybody's interested in seeing the paper that I wrote about that, I'll be happy to send it to you. And so I've been working together with these coalitions even before I knew about the Global Debt Facility. I didn't find out about the Global Debt Facility until after I had been fired. I was fired in 1977 illegally. Senator Lugar, who had been on the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, had been doing an investigation into the corruption. And first I went up the corporate ladder, which is what an in-house lawyer is supposed to do. I tried the Treasury Department to get them to do something about the corruption that I noticed. Because if you're a lawyer in a company that is issuing bonds on the capital markets, and the World Bank issues $180 billion worth of bonds all over the world's capital markets, you have got to be brought into compliance. And I could see that the financial statements of the World Bank were being fiddled. They were being fiddled because anybody that tried to report that there were inaccuracies would get fired. That means there's no internal controls. There's no way to be certain about the accuracy of the financial statements. Some of the accountants inside the World Bank were reporting that the interest bills that were being sent to the countries that were borrowing from the World Bank were being overstated, and those accountants were fired. There were other whistleblowers. Elaine Colville from the United Kingdom had pointed out that there was double accounting, that her unit, their charges were being paid for out of two separate places. That meant that the second amount that was being charged was a slush fund, and people could just do whatever they wanted to. You can't have that inside a bank, and I knew that full well because I had come to the World Bank from the Export-Import Bank, and before that I had been a lawyer on the capital markets. And one of the things about me, you can see through the timeline, is that I seem to have a nose for corruption. And whenever I find it, I report it. That's just the way I'm wired. I'm hardwired to blow the whistle on corruption. And one of the things that I disclosed a month ago, we had Throwback Thursday. I showed a picture of me blowing the whistle on my older sister, who, when she was combing my hair, was trying to untangle the knots, and I was blowing the whistle on her to whoever the photographer was for that snapshot. I'm the acting general counsel of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. That's one of the 5 agencies at the World Bank. And what I did last week, which is what has made, I think, our program go viral, is I mailed something called a commercial lien on some of the people who are holding up the global currency reset. I mailed it out on the 5th of September, and today Brian Lewis, who's helping me on the commercial lien, mailed out another notice. On the 21st of September, that's when we are going to record those liens, and when we record those liens, any of the people who we have served on the lien, they're going to be bankrupt. And one of the people we've served, it's a company, it's Allied Barton, they're the security guards, and people who have been watching this program have seen me struggling to try to get inside the World Bank. Allied Barton has refused to activate my security badge illegally, and now I'm going to be able to activate it myself because I'm going to be able to foreclose on all of their stock. Now that's one of the commercial liens. The second commercial lien, that's the public officials who haven't been fulfilling their duties of office. That includes President Barack Obama, Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of the Army John McHugh, Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Martin Dempsey, Inspector General of the Department of Defense John Reimer, Secretary of Treasury Jacob Lew, the President of the World Bank Jim Kim, and the Managing Director of the IMF Christine Lagarde. And I mailed those out on the 5th of September and mentioned this on a radio show. And in the studios of DCTV, we actually recorded a program where I discussed at greater length exactly what is a commercial lien. But I'll talk about it a little bit right now. That is relying on something called common law. Right now, our legal system is based on Roman law. It's based on something called admiralty law. And you wonder, how do you have admiralty law when we're not on the water? And it's really, it's a sleight of hand, and very astute people like Brian Lewis have made it their business to figure out how to use the common law to dismantle the admiralty law. And so what happened on the 5th of September, which is when I mailed those liens out, was Bruce had gone missing. Where was he? It turned out he was arrested and thrown in jail and never arraigned. And of course, when we couldn't track him down, who's we? That is the person who had told me about Bruce. That's Mark and Mark Dillon. And so I was rather mad at Mark, actually, for referring somebody to me who dropped out and left me in the lurch. And so Mark went looking for Bruce and found him in jail. And so now Bruce and Mark and I are working very hard to finalize this commercial lien, which they work very well. And so what I was able to say to my caller is that we have a perfect bridge for everybody to have the global currency reset. Before, what people were looking at was they were looking at somebody who felt that law should apply but had no real way to make it apply. And believe me, when Barack Obama tries to use his credit card and has no credit, we're going to have our global currency reset. So that's one of the reasons we're viral. But there are other things going on. And that is because I was inside the World Bank for 21 years. I got to know a lot of people, and they got to know me. In some of the segments, I've been talking about the relationships that I have, because everything that's going on here is really, it's about human relationships. There isn't a single thing that I do that I'm not helped with someone else. And as a matter of fact, some people were saying, boy, Karen, you had a really good trick up your sleeve, this commercial lien. Well, the fact of the matter is I'm not going to take any credit for that. It was Mark Dillon who contacted me and suggested this to me. And believe me, when I saw what that was, I was very grateful. What we're doing is really a group effort. And this coalition, it's people want to know exactly what it is. It is anybody who's watching this program and anybody who has received any of the emails that I've sent out, because we're not going to be something that you're going to find out about in the mainstream media. That's because the mainstream media is owned by the network of global corporate control, and they're exercising control and preventing and censoring, so that anybody who thinks that they can find out what's really going on by simply sitting back and turning on the television is going to find out that they're really misled by nothing but propaganda. What's really going on is what you're watching right now and what you're reading on the internet. Now, at the very heart of the Coalition for the Rule of Law, we have the BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And this group has, they got tired of waiting for the World Bank to start acting according to the rule of law. And so they've set up their own separate institutions. And one of the things that I tweeted a couple of weeks ago was I said, BRICS, make room for the new kid on the block. That is the United States minus the Federal Reserve, because the chances that we get rid of the Federal Reserve are 90 to 95% based on this very accurate power transition model. That's because the Federal Reserve is lying when they say they have the monetary gold reserves of the United States. The Treasury Department doesn't have them either. It's in this trust that was established by Jose Rizal at the end of World War II. And the reason that the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima is because the Japanese, Yamashita was one of the people who had been gathering up the gold. Yamashita was actually the son of Jose Rizal. So was Adolf Hitler, as a matter of fact. So we have a lot of reading to do to find out our real history, because the bankers, they've been dominating the universities. Anybody that thinks that, that getting tenure gives academic freedom is mistaken. That's a way of locking out people who are too inquisitive and trying to tell things the way they really are. We don't know about our ancient civilizations that you can find off the coast, buried. When the sea level went up 400 feet, there are many structures, or the Sphinx for that matter. So we have a lot of catching up to do on what is what. And don't expect that you're going to find this out by going to the library, because the press has also been controlled. It's the internet that you really have to look at, and at least 80% of what you're reading on the internet is also misinformation from the network of global corporate control. What you need to do, as I've said before, as I've said many times, is you need to establish like a book club of people who you enjoy interacting with, and just study what's going on, compare notes, and try to get an accurate reading of what the reality is. And at the moment, we're in a transition where many, many people are no longer trusting the mainstream media. I've said that that's one of the indicators that you can use to see how smooth the transition is, because you'll know how many people are going to be better informed and how many people are going to be prepared and working along as we go along with this global currency reset. So one of the posts that I made this past week on a comment was somebody who was complaining that humanity was really going to be caught flat-footed and that we were all very stupid. And I said that, as a matter of fact, we're not as stupid and timid, and that we have placed the network of global corporate control into receivership. That means that we can carve up this, this network into little pieces, and we're going to do that. Each and every central bank is going to be given back to the country that it's in, and the people inside their countries, nobody's going to tell them how to run their countries, but they're going to be in charge, and it's not going to be the network of global corporate control. I sent an email to the BRICS, and I heard back from the president of South Africa. It was one of these acknowledgments that he had received the email, but it was forwarding an email that I had sent to the Russians, because just this past week, the Russians mentioned that they had discovered some gold that was buried outside of Moscow in trucks. And just a couple of weeks before that, we found out that there was an entire train that was found in Poland, and that also contains gold that's owned by the Global Debt Facility. In 2013, we heard that there were some paintings of Monet that were being recovered because Vilma Bautista, who had sold them, didn't have good title. She was the maid for Ferdinand Marcos, and Ferdinand Marcos was the lawyer who set up the Global Debt Facility. There are a lot of people that say that Ferdinand Marcos was corrupt. He was absolutely not corrupt. What he did was he conserved the gold monetary reserves and put them in trust for humanity, and those reserves stayed in trust and in hiding for 50 years, so that at the end of that period, when the gold is now going to be returned to each of the countries, there are no competing claims. That's because of something called the statute of limitations. Anybody who had a claim on that gold has lost it after the 50-year period has lapsed. So one of the questions that I got, people were worried that there was going to be some strings attached, and they thought we're going to be going from the frying pan into the fire, is what they said. That was a group from West Virginia, and I wrote them back and I said no. They were reading the monetary agreement that has to be signed by each of the countries, and there's 0.25% fee that's going to be paid, and they thought that that was interest and it was going to be charged each year. And I said, no, that's just one fee up front, which is going to something called the redeemers. The redeemers are people who Ferdinand Marcos assigned the right to sign, but those signatories have got to be authenticated by the Board of Governors, and there are a number of them. And I have said to all of these authorized signatories that they're only going to be authorized for individual transactions, and this is so that we don't have a problem of corruption. And we're going to have to work very hard to come up with systems that are going to keep us from just replicating the corruption that we now have a chance of dismantling. There is just so much corruption, and if you look around, you can find where it is. One of the other questions that I got was from a person in Texas who said that the progress on the global currency reset is really not quick enough, and that people ought to take matters into their own hands. And so I tried to reassure him, and if you want to see what I had said, I've put that up on the internet. But I said there are a number of indicators that we're making very good progress. And one of the indicators is the fact that we're now hearing about all of this gold that's coming to light. This is because the countries are signaling that they're ready to work together in the coalition for the rule of law. There are other signs. For example, the fact that that people are now paying a lot of attention to what I have to say and what the people that I'm working with have to say. And when we put some of the, also I think one of the signs of progress is the fact that, that we have this wonderful series and opportunity to tell people about what's going on from DC TV, from public access TV. And I'm going to be putting some more of the programming that we did in August up on the internet, and you'll see in the previous archives, you'll see a lot of questions, and the point is we have answers. And the fact that we have managed to answer these questions and to document everything that we've been talking about, this is something that builds trust. One of the programs that's going to come up, I believe next week, is about Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. This is the way that the citizens in the United States have to take back a legitimate government, because at the time, right now, we the people have withdrawn our consent to the federal government because at least in Article 5 it says when 2/3 of the state legislatures apply for an amendment, that there should be a constitutional convention. And we've had over 700 applications, and the U.S. Congress has fallen down on the job. So we're going to have our constitutional convention. That's another indicator that the Coalition for the Rule of Law is alive and well. I see that we've just got 2 minutes, and I've been digressing, so I'm not able to cover all of the things that I had wanted to cover. I think the most important thing is that the people who are aware of this Coalition for the Rule of Law have got to reach out to the people around them and reassure them, because you'll see there is a lot of misinformation, and this global currency reset, it's the first time that all of the people on this planet have combined together to take back our wealth and to apply our currency in a way that we're not going to have to be paying taxes to a foreign network that has simply printed money and doesn't have any right for it. The countries that we're working with, it's virtually every single country. But when I say we're working with them, we're using the framework of the Bretton Woods institutions that were put in place specifically for this purpose. We are not going to be coming into the countries themselves to tell the countries what has to happen. But what will need to happen is that the people themselves are going to have to work together to get themselves ready to clean up the corruption, which has stretched down to the local levels. One of the questions that came up this past week was whether the United States citizens would back a military takeover if it was proven that the government was acting unconstitutionally. And what I said was that it was absolutely not necessary to have a coup, that we're using the common law, the remedies that we were talking about, and the Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, and so we don't need to have a coup. I want to thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've discussed indicators that show how the network of global corporate control is no longer in control. The media blackout and censorship are now in plain view. People are openly discussing the global debt facility and the global currency reset. The network of global corporate control cannot stand up against sunlight, and it cannot prevent the world's wealth that is administered by the World Bank and the IMF from being returned to the beneficiaries, which is humanity. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis. Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, and this show is the 21st segment in the series on the network of global corporate control. Today's program is about Article 5 of the United States Constitution. The U.S. Constitution has been admired as the first of its kind and has influenced the constitutions of other nations. Ferdinand Marcos has said that the United States is the bulwark of humanity and must prevent another Dark Ages and save our humanity. And I'd like to show a statement where Ferdinand Marcos was presenting that to the United States Congress.
A speech before my own people and before the world. Fate and destiny has decreed that the United States of America be the trustee of modern civilization against the threat of a possible second Dark Ages. And America cannot fail. And therefore, we, the Filipino people, come and bring to you a prayer that God and His divine providence may grant you guidance, strengthen both your heart and hand, so that that hand may be strong on the lever of power and save our humanity.
Ferdinand Marcos had a very special role in the United States, and that is because he was the lawyer for the Global Debt Facility. He set it up. What is the Global Debt Facility? That is the trust that is for the benefit of all of humanity. It contains the world's monetary gold reserves, and it's the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund that administer that. And when you say the World Bank and IMF, you're not talking about the president of the World Bank or the managing director of the IMF, because those two have been captured by the network of global corporate control, which has bought up about 40% of the assets, the net worth of the assets on the world's capital markets, and takes 60% of their earnings. We know this from a study that was done by 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology. And the reason that we have Article 5 is because the founding fathers were also part and parcel of the network of global corporate control. Of course, it was called something else at that time, but they were all Freemasons. And if you study what Freemasons were, they were the secret society that were dominating the United States without bothering to tell the citizens at the time what was really going on. So Benjamin Franklin, he was the Postmaster General of the United States. He was the deputy postmaster when the United States was still a colony, and he lived in the United Kingdom. There are some other surprises when you do some research about Benjamin Franklin, but one of the things that Benjamin Franklin did do was he was at least honest. On the last day of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, a lady asked Dr. Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" "A republic," replied the doctor, "if you can keep it." And this is because Benjamin Franklin knew firsthand what he was talking about. Franklin had negotiated the Treaty of Paris at the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783, and he knew that the Revolutionary War debts would fall due in 1871. That is when the bankers foreclosed on the United States and put a second secret constitution into effect. Not that many people who are talking about Article 5 understand that our current constitution is no longer in effect, that it's been replaced by this second secret constitution. But the fact of the matter is that the preamble to the Constitution begins, "We the people," and it provides that the Constitution is based upon the consent of the governed. And the U.S. Constitution provides a way to determine whether the governed have withdrawn this consent. That is what Article 5 of the Constitution does. It provides that when 2/3 of the state legislatures require an amendment of the Constitution, that there should be a constitutional convention. And we now have over 750 applications to the U.S. Congress, but the U.S. Congress has completely ignored its mandatory duty. So that means that we are now in a situation called an interregnum. But before we talk about where we are, let's talk about some of the people who are trying to get us our Article 5 Constitutional Convention. I'd like to introduce Bill Walker. He's a former journalist and he's a newspaper publisher, and he's a founding member of Friends of the Article 5 Convention. Bill has brought 2 federal lawsuits, Walker versus the United States in 2000 and Walker versus members of Congress in 2004. That last lawsuit was taken in appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States. The 2 lawsuits deal specifically with the obligation of Congress to call an Article 5 convention. And now let's hear from Bill Walker.
But I know your organization has been working very hard to get the Article 5 convention going. So why don't you give me a little background about your organization and how you've gotten involved and where you think it is right now?
Okay. Well, Friends of the Article 5 Convention was the first national organization dedicated to the calling of an Article 5 convention. It's nonpartisan. It's basically designed as an informational source rather than an advocacy source of any given amendment proposal. We decided on that course because we found that previous efforts to get a convention called by Congress always ran into the roadblock that political opposition would cause them to be opposed and defeated and so on and so forth. So we simply said, okay, we just won't favor any particular amendment proposal. And we, of course, discuss them, things like this, of ideas and so on that have been proposed and so on and so forth, but we're not going to endorse or back any particular amendment proposal. We've been around since about 2007, and we predate, like I said, everybody else that's currently existing. They didn't come for about another 5 years after we did. As far as things that we've done, we gathered the first set of applications, a collection of the applications, and you can receive them today at the foavc.org website. The Constitution mandates that it takes 34 applications, 2/3 of the current states, at any time to cause a convention call from Congress. That today would mean 34 applications from 34 states. They do not have to be of the same subject or anything else. You can read the 766 applications from the 49 states, and it's all public record. So that pretty well settles that issue as far as to whether or not Congress is obligated to call. You can also read the 2 times that Congress itself has stated it in its official statements, plus the 4 Supreme Court rulings also stating the same thing. So as far as it being mandated by law and by admission and everything, it is admission. However, as you will also read in the front page, Congress is adamant about not calling, and this, I think, is strictly a political decision. They simply don't want to lose their political power of controlling the entire Constitution. And that is based on the latest lawsuit. I filed the first 2 myself back in 2000, 2004, the later Walker v. Members of Congress going to the Supreme Court. The current one is by Mr. Montgomery Sibley. I believe it's Sibley or Sibley. I've always mispronounced him. Anyway, he currently has filed a suit against Mr. McCormick and Mr. Bonnier of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they are fighting it tooth and nail. There's no other word to use to describe it. They are opposing it with everything they've got, which I think pretty well speaks for their belief in obeying the Constitution of the United States. The current status of it is it's before a judge. the judge is going to be deciding which court it's going to go in, or he will ignore a law that is very clear and plain and say, well, we're just going to dismiss this case, even though it contradicts law. Now, based on my personal experience, I would say any of that is possible, that they will try to obey the law, or they'll have a judge who just contrives it and says that Congress can completely ignore it. Anyway, that's the basic history of Article 5 to this point, is that a lot of people know that Congress knows it has to call. It's just that simple. They just don't want to do it. There's no other way. In fact, if you want to find out how adamant it is, take any member of Congress and go to their office if you're in Washington, D.C., or go to any of them and tell them that you want to talk about an Article 5 convention. We had one member of FOAC that did it down in Texas, and the member of Congress literally ran out the back door. They are absolutely scared of it. They will do everything to avoid you. We've had instances where there have been people that have known members of Congress for 30 years, tried to talk about an Article convention, and the members of Congress would not speak to them again. They just literally are that adamant about it. This is nothing to do with anything but straight political power. And the ironic part is that politically speaking, they have 100% cover. It's mandated by the Constitution. There is no option in Congress. So basically, if Congress is required to call, they can always state truthfully and completely honestly, we're mandated, it's completely out of our hands, and then they can come in as a white knight, propose another amendment or whatever it is, if the convention ever did propose a bad amendment that somehow got ratified. Of course, everybody knows that doesn't make any real difference, because we all know that the Constitution allows that amendments can be rescinded. They can be refused, as they did with the 18th and the 21st Amendment.
My position and thank you for sharing that with us, my position is that the United States is now in something called an interregnum, which is to say that we are not following our Constitution, and therefore we're in the soup.
Well, a lot of people have said that about other issues, and I'd have to say that, there's always ways that you can show in the Constitution that there might be or might be. You can have argument. There's no argument about it with Article 5. It's absolutely clear. I mean, a child can count up to 34 states. And like I said, you can go to the list and just go right down and read them yourself. There's no.
So you agree when I say there's an interregnum that that's exactly where we are?
I would say as far as Article 5, I definitely. To that extent. The other questions I'd have to look at an individual, but there's no question. And I mean, technically, if you're violating one part of the Constitution, you're violating it all, because in this case, once they don't want to obey the amendment process, they are denying the people their right of alter and abolish, and that is in turn affecting the rest of the Constitution. So it's a matter of semantics more than it is effect. It's a situation that if it isn't rectified, I greatly fear this is going to finally blow up, and I mean very seriously.
Thank you, Bill. And now I'd like to introduce another person who has been working tirelessly to get us out of our interregnum and to get us a constitutional convention under Article 5. That's John de Herrera. John has traveled to nearly all of the states in order to ensure that Article 5 Constitutional Convention takes place. Let's hear from John now.
Karen, thanks for giving me a call, and we've been in touch. How many years has it been now? It's been at least 2, maybe 3, right?
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah. So, thanks for continuing your efforts that you do, and I ever since I met you, the first call we ever had, I always knew that Karen is someone that's going to stick with this, and you recognize, you were one of the people years ago that recognized the Article 5 stuff that 3 years ago everyone was just like, what are you talking about? But in that time, we've seen a lot of progress with the Article 5 movement, a lot of groups coming online. In fact, this might be of interest to some of the listeners. There's one group that's pushing for an Article 5 convention, and they want term limits for members of Congress. They see that as that's their pet amendment, and there's a lot of groups that have their pet amendment. But I've watched their Facebook page go from this was probably about 4 months ago, they would get 9 or 10 likes when they'd post something on Facebook. Now they post something on Facebook, they get 900 or 1,000 likes. And this is all centered around the idea of hey, folks, the government is not working in our interest anymore, and we need to utilize this provision in the Constitution. So it's really great to see 1,000 likes on a Facebook post saying we need to hold an Article 5 convention.
Yeah.
As far as my efforts, my continuing efforts, this is, I mean, I would consider this kind of a golden age for Facebook, because I really see it as, the people that I talk to about it, and, from teenagers to adults, most people are going to the Facebook feed to get their news and information. They've got their CNN Facebook page or their Fox News Facebook page, what have you. And so people go there for their news, and so this really is a good time to do activism through Facebook. I think people do read the comments, and when I do go comment on, there might be some, like for instance, Marianne Williamson. She's a writer, and I guess you might characterize her as a spiritualist of some sort. She's got a spiritual message, and she uses a lot of Christianity and sometimes Buddhism and things like that. And she's got a lot of followers. And you can, she'll post something on Facebook, and you could write a comment to her right there, and she'll reply to it. Other people will reply to it. And so Facebook really is. It's a great way of raising consciousness. I don't think it's going to be a golden age for too much longer. I think the powers that be are going to probably get in there and try and, lock it down to some extent to, prevent this free form interaction that's available to us now. But so my efforts are the social media stuff, and I do go to websites, and I do call people. You may remember 2 years ago, I was really trying to get the constitutional sheriffs online with the Article 5. And their head leader is retired Sheriff Richard Mack, who I've spoken with face-to-face at a number of conferences. I'm not sure if he's another operative. I wouldn't be surprised, but I can't say that all the sheriffs that I talked to during that period, they just didn't see it. They saw Article 5 the way most people see it, which is, it's like setting off a bomb on the Constitution. They didn't see how it would work for the people.
Thank you, John. Now, there are other groups that are working to get us an Article 5 constitutional convention. I'm sorry to say that some of these groups are actually being financed by the network of global corporate control. I had, and I know this for a fact because I have been in touch with these groups, and I've been asking them whether they understand that we no longer are working under our organic constitution. I've worked with some of their volunteers who answered the phones, and the volunteers were very surprised to hear this. If a group is serious about promoting an Article 5 constitutional convention, they have got to inform citizens about where they actually are, because you cannot fix a problem until you know exactly what the problem is. Now, in the previous segments, we've been talking about some of the problems that we've had with the U.S. Congress, and I'd like to show that placard. The citizens are holding the U.S. Congress in contempt. The placard says, "Free bungee jumps for Congress, no strings attached." That's a pretty sorry indictment. And one of the things that the Congress has been doing is every year, behind closed doors, they have been extending a state of emergency and not bothering to tell the citizens about that. What that means is that citizens, when they pay off their mortgages, do not get valid title to their houses. What they get is something called a warranty of title. It means that when they go to court, the federal courts, the judges are no longer hearing their cases in the courts that were provided under the original Constitution. Instead, they deem that the citizens have consented to secret administrative courts where the judges are actually employees of the network of global corporate control. This is a travesty, and unless and until the citizens know exactly where they are, they won't know what they need to do in the Constitutional Convention. There's a lot of disinformation that's going around. People are saying that the Constitutional Convention would be very dangerous. Frankly, things couldn't be any worse than they already are when you know what's actually in effect. But there's no reason to fear a Constitutional Convention, because once the convention has done its work, the amendments that are being proposed have got to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, just as any other amendment process. What I would hope would happen is that the Constitutional Convention would simply reinstate the original organic Constitution, and then we can take our time determining what exactly needs to be fixed. And there is a lot that needs to be fixed, and one of the biggest problems is that people don't actually know how dire the circumstances are. They don't know that we've had a state of emergency. They don't know that the U.S. Congress considers itself to be a manager of a corporation, that they consider the United States to be a corporation, and for the District of Columbia, that the District of Columbia is actually the place where the government has been collapsed. The District of Columbia is serving a very sinister role, and people need to understand that so that they can do the necessary to put our original Constitution back into effect. I wanted also to talk about what people have found out that the U.S. Congress has been doing. They have not been paying any attention whatsoever to public opinion. There have been studies on that we've discussed earlier. It turns out that the only thing that the Congress is paying attention to is the network of global corporate control. And we've been hearing a lot in the news about people who are considering themselves as candidates for the next presidential elections. Anybody, frankly, I think, that has come from the U.S. Congress shouldn't be considered, because they've been lying to the public. They have not told the public that the original Constitution is not in effect, that we're under martial law, that we're in an interregnum, and we've got to wake up. We've got to find out where we're actually seated, and one of the good things about the United States citizens is we have refused to relinquish the Second Amendment, which provides that that our government is not going to be able to take over without a fight. And that's to the very good. The rest of the world is looking to the United States citizens to prevent humanity from being overrun by the network of global corporate control. I would like to thank you very much for listening to us, and we're going to be going into some of the reasons for optimism. That is because the Coalition for the Rule of Law, which is centered in the Board of Governors of the World Bank and the IMF, is using all of the gold that is in the trust for the benefit of humanity to take back our republic, and that's going to be a very exciting time for us. We're not going to have a corporation telling us that they're above the law and that we have to do what they tell us. And all of the war debts that the bankers tell us we owe are actually going to be offset against the debts that the bankers owe us. and we're not going to go into another dark ages, because in this day and age, we're able to avoid a crash of the paper fractional reserve fiat currencies by replacing them with gold from the global debt facility. Today, we have the internet and a cooperative, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund Board of Governors, who are working together. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis.